I'm Adam Maness.
And I'm Peter Martin.
And this is the You'll Hear It podcast.
Daily jazz advice coming at you.
Pete, what do we got today?
We have a very special guest, Mr. Steve Wilson. What's going on, Steve?
Hey, great to be here, fellas.
Great to have you.
Yeah, back in St. Louis.
Yeah, that's right. Steve Wilson, saxophone royalty in the house today. We're excited to have you. We just finished up recording your new course, Jazz Saxophone Fundamentals. And look, we put the name out there, so that's it.
If there was any uncertainty before, that's all got to be gone now.
That's right.
It's in stone now.
That's right. But we thought it'd be fun to have you on the You'll Hear It podcast and talk about your seven. Like we were telling you, we love to talk about, we're all about the sevens. We're all about the lucky sevens.
Right.
But we asked you for your seven we're going to call them seven selected saxophonists because there's a lot of S's in that. Like snaky saxophone and all that.
Steve's
seven selected saxophonists. And as we were talking, you said that these are not your favorite or the best or whatever. These are your selected. So I think this is a great list you have. And if you'd like, maybe just go ahead and kick it off with number one.
Yeah, well, there are seven of my favorites for sure. Johnny Hodges, well, I will say unequivocally, is the favorite, my favorite saxophonist. I got hip to Johnny Hodges my first year in college. And I was very lucky because our director and my mentor, Doug Richards, turned us on to the music of Duke Ellington. And we were playing a lot of those charts from like the 1930s, Daybreak Express, the Mooch, East St. Louis Toodaloo, a lot of the older stuff, along with an extended piece he had called A Tattooed Bride.
You went to one of those hip schools.
Yeah, it was very hip. It was really hip. And man, that was it changed my life. It changed my saxophone life. Johnny Hodges, to me, is one of the most brilliant saxophonist ever. I mean, we forget how much of a virtuosic player he was before he gave up soprano in the mid-1940s. But, his earlier stuff in the 20s and 30s, man, his stuff was as virtuosic as anybody. And right now, I had the good fortune, I'm reading his biography, which hasn't been released yet. But the author called me a few months ago and sent me a manuscript. And so I'm learning, so much we didn't know about Hodges and his whole history. And early on, man, he had it. I mean, he was destined for greatness. So, a very interesting character.
Right.
And just one of the best sounds that ever came out of the saxophone.
Absolutely.
Period.
Yeah.
And you can't find a saxophonist that doesn't love Johnny Hodges.
Yeah, or a musician, I think.
Yeah, right. And I've been talking with a few classical saxophonists, and they said, "Man, Hodges is one of the tops." So
nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we started it out right here then.
Well, I like that we started out kind of hedging, being like, "Now these aren't his favorites." That's right. And Steve goes right in with like,
He's
"This
like,
is
oh yeah, this is
absolute
my."
Yeah, he's the cat. He's my cat.
Now, is Hodges? I know we got a bunch more to go to, but I'm just thinking about. I'm really interested to read the biography. I don't mean if you get a chance to slip me an extra underground copy, it's all good.
Gotcha.
No, but Johnny Hodges is somebody that whenever I've listened to, I don't know a lot about his life, but he has such a personality. Well, he has such a great technique and sound that it feels like his personality came out of his horn, and it's almost like you feel like you know him. And I'm wondering, does his life biography kind of follow the way he sounds?
Well, that's interesting, man, because not really. I mean, they called him, among his many nicknames, Stoneface. Because you never knew what he was thinking. And if you look at videos of him playing, with Duke and playing those beautiful pieces like Isfahan, and you hear, if you were to close your eyes and you hear this beautiful sound coming out, and then you see the image, and then you see a guy, man, he's basically expressionless, sometimes playing out the side of his mouth, looking around, like almost disengaged. You're like, what? But yeah, I think he was, I don't know, I think he just played, he wasn't very open to a lot of people. So he kind of played it close to the vest. But he managed to create this beautiful sound. I mean, and he really had a very high standard, that's for sure. So, but interesting character. Yeah.
Great, good stuff.
I have a feeling a lot of players on this list had a pretty high standard, judging by.
I think so.
What we're about to go. What's our number two?
Yeah, the great Joe Henderson.
Yes.
Yeah, and I had the good fortune of playing with Joe a few times. And I wouldn't say that I got to know him. I don't know how many people really got
He's
to
another
know
one
Joe.
that he's another one that kept it close to the vest.
Stone Face too.
Yeah, they didn't call him the Phantom for nothing. You know? But my first encounter with Joe happened actually before I moved to New York. And a local drummer in Virginia by the name of Jay Sennett used to bring in a lot of guest artists. He would put a band together and bring in guest artists and would have me on the gig sometimes. And Joe was one of those artists. So that was the first time I crossed paths with him. Then not long after I moved to New York, I was on Kevin Hayes' first record date, and he had Joe. Joe and I were the horn players. And got to, didn't get to know him a bit, but got to hang and talk with him a bit.
Yeah.
And then a couple years after that, I was on a record with Renee Rosnes. She did a record for Blue Note, and again, Joe and I were on that date. And we actually ended up playing, I think, a live date at the Blue Note during the record release. And then I got to play on his big band record that he did for Verve.
That's a great record.
Yeah,
It is a great record.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't know about that is Joe and Kenny Dorham had a rehearsal band in the 60s, a rehearsal big band that Joe wrote a lot of the charts for, as well as Kenny. And that band never got recorded. So a lot of the charts that were done on this record, were not done from their writing, but actually Slide Hampton wrote some stuff, and I think Mike Moss and a couple of other, Bob Belden.
Okay.
I think there was one or two charts from Joe or Kenny that was on the record. I can't remember which tune, but it's a great recording, man.
Yeah.
And it gives you another side of Joe's music.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
And also, well, just so you know, our You'll Hear It audience is actually super hip and advanced, so they probably do know about the Joe Henderson, Kenny Dorham.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they probably
Any
do
other
that.
podcast? Probably not, but I'm just putting it out there.
Right.
All right, number 3, who you got?
Well, Sonny Rollins.
Ooh.
And
You're coming strong and
Yes.
you're staying up there. When do we get to the scrub sound?
yeah, right. Ain't no scrubs on this list. No, Sonny, to me, Sonny, along with Louis Armstrong, in my estimation, were the two greatest pure improvisers we've ever had in his music. And what I mean by that is that, and particularly in the case of Sonny Rollins, is that you cannot pare down any of what Sonny played to a Sonny Rollins lick. To me, there's no such thing as a Sonny Rollins lick. There is a Sonny Rollins sound. There's a Sonny Rollins approach. You know Sonny when you hear him. You can dial up one of 1,000 quotes that he always played, but unlike, say, Charlie Parker that developed a given language and other players that kind of did that, Sonny was just always so in the moment, in the second of what was happening. It's so spontaneous. You never knew what he was going to do. And he was so rhythmic, and he had a lot of humor in his playing. Like Armstrong, they had such an amazing sense of time and time feel. All this stuff we talk about these days about playing over the bar line. Well, Louis Armstrong was doing that in the 1920s. And Sonny Rollins, what he did with rhythm and then harmony and taking it out. And of course, when he was doing his Ornette influence period, when he had the band with Don Cherry and Billy Higgins, he covered so much ground musically. But you can never put him in a box and say, oh yeah, this Sonny Rollins lick, one of his 100 licks. No, there was no such thing.
Right.
But yet you know it when you hear it.
Right.
So I just think his importance can't be overstated.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Good. All right, number 4.
Well, the great Phil Woods, and another gentleman that I admired for many years before I got to meet him and play with him a couple of times. Of course, like many of us of our age, I got hip to Phil Woods through the Billy Joel song, Just the Way You Are. And I think I was in high school when that song came out. And I went, man, who was that saxophone player? And my high school band director said, oh, you don't know Phil Woods? Let me tell you about Phil Woods. And he turned me on to Live at the Showboat. And I said, Jesus Christ, man, this guy is unbelievable. And I was really into a Phil Woods thing for a while, bought a couple of his records. And then ultimately I got to play with him a few years ago. And I tell this quick anecdote. A few years ago, I was playing at the 92Y series with Bill Charlap in New York, which he does every summer. And he put one of the saxophone bands together with Phil and myself and Jimmy Green and Harry Allen and Jimmy Heath. I mean, boy, what a band. And we were playing some of the Benny Carter charts.
Yeah, but who's on piano?
Well, you guys weren't there, man, so don't count. But I remember, now Phil, keep in mind, Phil had emphysema at this time, and so he had to walk around with an oxygen tank. And here's this 75-year-old cat, with an oxygen tank, and he's playing lead alto. And man, his sound was still huge. He always had a huge sound. But even with this emphysema, his sound, man, I couldn't even hear myself playing beside him. It was Jesus. And I remember we were playing one of those charts, and I went off stage, and my back locked up. I'm like, oh my God, and my back locked up, man. And so at the end of the night, I went to get in a taxi. I couldn't even get in a taxi because my back had just like someone twisted a towel. And someone had to help me in a taxi. And I got home, and I'm like, man, what in the world happened? What's going on? And then I figured it out. On one of those tunes, I was exerting myself so hard to try to hear myself playing because Phil was playing beside me that my back went into crazy spasms. Oh. Fortunately, my acupuncturist lived across the street from me, so the next day he hooked me up. Oh. And I said, man, Phil Woods did this to me, man. I said, well, man, what a rite of passage.
Yeah. He's like, I've seen this before, Phil Woods effect.
Yeah, right. And then I got to tell him that about a year later. He says, yeah, that's right, kid. You got to come with sound, kid. That's right. Sound. Yeah, baby, gotta come with that sound. Yeah, baby. But he was great, man. He was, Phil didn't suffer any fools, but he was always very kind and supportive to me. Nice. And I really appreciate that because he was, to me, a craftsman's craftsman. All of those records he did as a lead alto player, with the sessions with Oliver Nelson and all the studio stuff, and then being one of the greatest saxophone players ever.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're moving on now. What are we at, number 5? We're moving through this list so nicely.
Julian Cannonball Adderley.
Nice.
Well, he was one of my early inspirations. I got to see him live when I was very young before I started playing saxophone. And my father bought the Country Preacher record. Yeah. And, man, I used to play that record to death. Yeah. And still do. Yeah. And then when I saw him live, man, he just had such an aura about him, the sound that came out and the energy. And I just said, yeah, man, I want to do that, seeing him live. And of course, now, and then learning about his legacy and learning about his whole history and how important he was, and then checking out the recordings with Miles and his own quintets. I mean, we all love Cannonball. Yeah. So,
Now, it's interesting so far. We can just take a quick breather because we're between 5 and 6. This is like the fifth inning stretch,
Right.
But you're kind of pretty closely straddling between altos and tenors. And I'm just wondering, is there any? I mean, of course, you're known as an alto saxophonist and soprano, but can play all the saxophonists. But do you look at, I think especially about like Cannonball and Johnny Hodges, kind of the prototypical alto saxophonists.
Right.
Do you look, in putting together a list like this, is it just all saxophone, or do you think about them as tenor players or alto players?
No, it's just who they are. I mean, it's funny you should mention that because I originally wanted to be a tenor player. For a long time, I wanted to be a tenor saxophone player. And it really wasn't until I think my sophomore, junior year in college, when I got to be lead alto in the big band, that I really commit to being an alto player.
Once you got that lead alto
That's
money,
right.
you were like, I don't want to play those middle voices.
Well, my first year in school, I was an oboe major. And then I got in the big band by playing baritone because, I was low guy in the totem pole and the saxophone section was killing. And I was just a new kid on the block, but I wanted to be in that band and play with these guys.
New kid on the block, you want to be in that band? It's a great band, man.
Yeah, I want their money.
Did they have a Barry player?
Yeah, right. You're right. Yeah, but up until that point, I really played more with the tenor concept. Up until that point, and until I was forced to really deal with the alto sound by being lead alto. I was more of a tenor head, but I never owned a tenor saxophone. I always borrowed one. Friends always lent me one, and I played gigs on it, and always played with that concept. I was transcribing tenor players, you know. But it really wasn't until that point that I really felt like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to commit to the alto.
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to number 6, to your number 6 of Steve's selected saxophone masters. And this is a great place from what you're talking about, because you talk about different saxophones, different ways of playing the instrument,
Yeah.
original approaches.
Yeah, well, Rahsaan Roland Kirk is a true original in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
And another guy that I got to see live when I was very young. It might have been on the same weekend that I saw Cannonball at the Jazz Festival in my hometown. But
What's up, Hampton Roads?
Yeah, that's it. Hampton,
Tidewater, what's up?
Right, that's right. And seeing him live, man, just blew my mind. Because, I mean, as you can see from the video, seeing Rahsaan is an experience. It's not just about the music. I mean, the energy and what he brings to the whole presence of being on the stage and the energy of the music. And even early on, in listening to his music, this guy he was an amazing historian, because he was all about the history of black music, and he did everything from music of the day, playing songs by Burt Bacharach and Dionne Warwick and Motown, to playing Fats Waller and talking about Paul Robeson, and of course he could, on a dime, he could play like Ben Webster, or Coleman Hawkins, and then he could play as out avant-garde as any of those cats. Yeah. But he was a force, man. Yeah. He was a force, just a force of music beyond category. Yeah. We'll never see the likes of Rahsaan again. Right. Not
Agreed.
ever.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think, from a non-saxophonist perspective, I mean, all these players are amazing, but I think Rahsaan, I think about just the power and confidence as a saxophonist, him kind of eclipsing almost any of these people, just like the mastery and the power of what he can say with the instrument. Oh,
completely. And he could play with any of them. Yeah. He could play with any of them, man, in any style or anything. Yeah. And it was all within his wheelhouse. And yet, the whole world was sound to him. The whole world was music. I've gotten to know his widow, Dorothon, very well. We've become very good friends over the years. And she's another force, let me tell you. Yeah, wow. She just retired from WBGO. She's 85, something like that. And she is a pistol, man. She's still got vim and vigor, and she's out there doing it, hanging, and Nice. So yeah, he's just really, to me, the epitome of a true original. Yep. There was no template for him, and he's just a true original, man.
There's something really inspiring in that freedom, right? We tend to put ourselves in whatever box we want to consider ourselves, but there's room.
That's right.
To think outside of those.
That's right. And he had no fear. No fear whatsoever.
Put on some sunglasses, put a couple horns in your mouth. Go to town, man. If you're hearing it, you'll hear it.
That's right.
I think we got one more left on the list.
Yeah.
I'm getting sad. I missed Steve already. We're coming up on number 7.
Yeah. Well, the great Jerry Dodgen, and Jerry has become one of my mentors and one of my musical godfathers over the years. I had the great fortune of starting to sub in the American Jazz Orchestra around 1989, and Jerry was the lead alto. And it was a repertory band that was led by the great John Lewis, of course. I think Gary Giddens was one of its managers or artistic directors. And it would, play, music of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And Jerry Dodgen was one of the kindest people, and of course I knew of his work with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis, and I've learned more about playing lead alto from him than anyone. Just playing beside him was an education, because Jerry didn't play loud, but he had a sound that was very present, and he made you listen. But he was very easy to play, and he was so professional, man, but also didn't take himself too seriously. He just made it so easy for you to work with him, and he was very supportive, and ended up being on gigs where I was playing lead and he was playing second, even though I said, Jerry, please, and he said, no, you play lead, go ahead. And I thought, what am I doing?
Yeah, wait, so let me get this straight. Jerry mentored you. He helped you. He led you with his beautiful
I see
sound.
where this is going.
And then you stole his gig and relegated him to get to second alto. Steve Wilson's in the house. Wilsonian.
Oh, man.
What up, Jerry?
Well, no, Jerry is he's not playing anymore now, but everyone loves him and respects him, and because of what he's brought to the music. And again, an illustrious career. He and Phil played together a lot, of course. They were very, very close friends. Did all that work with Oliver Nelson. And a quick Jerry Dodgen story. I was subbing in the Vanguard band one night. This was back in the 90s. And Mel, when Mel was still playing drums, and Mel called two of the hardest charts in the book back to back. Cherry Juice, which is like one of Thad's charts. It's a C minor blues, but it's so fast and so hard. And another one called Soft Lights and Sweet Music, where the whole line is built on this 12-tone row, and the band is tooty. So there's in unison, so there's nowhere to hide, man. And he called those two tunes back to back. And I'll never forget this, man. I was just struggling to get through it. And by the end, and it ended the set. And at the end of the set, when the rest of the band had left the stage, I was just sitting there just stunned, just completely stunned, because I was just like, oh my God, what just happened? And Jerry Dodgen, who was in the audience, Jerry came up and he said, yeah, I know that feeling. It's like one of those moments when you go, gee, how did I look? Not how did I sound, how did I look? So I never forgot that. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, but he's such a beautiful man, a beautiful soul, man. I love him to death. And as I tell him, I take him with me everywhere I go.
Wow.
Yeah, he's really been such an inspiration.
Well, that's great. That's a fantastic list and a fantastic place to finish things off. Steve, thanks so much for being here. We are so much looking forward to Fundamentals of Jazz Saxophone, your new course. Put a little plug in here.
It's being released today.
It's being released today. That's right.
Right now.
It's like we are in the future, Steve. This is future Steve, future Adam, and future Pete.
Yeah, we've already transcribed it.
We've transcribed
every
every
work is done.
Yeah, no, this is why I usually talk about all the things that it's gonna cause you work.
Don't do that. Don't do too much.
No, but there's every single note, every
on,
single
bro.
symbol is transcribed. No, a lot of Steve's notes are transcribed. And Steve in his inimitable, what is that word? Inimitable?
I don't know what you're trying to say. I have no idea.
I'm like very high class and high level. His style of playing, and it's very
And teaching.
Yeah, I mean it's super tactical, but in such a loving way. And I think everyone's going to really enjoy this because you just lay it out.
Yeah.
You know.
Thank you, man.
And I think having had the pleasure to hang with you and to play with you over the years, and to be, around your illumination of jazz knowledge, I think that this is a great representative, and I'm so glad to help you kind of share this with the world. And it really is not just for saxophone players. I would say anybody who is, you do so much great stuff about, phrasing and interpreting melody, and yeah, you get into some great saxophone stuff, but I think it's just a wonderful series of some great performances with, wonderful rhythm section, kind of seeing you in action, and then breaking down precisely what you do from, leader's saxophonist standpoint. A lot of fun stuff.
Well, thank you guys for having me to be a part of this amazing thing that you're doing, man. This is really going to set a new template, and I'm just really honored to be a part of it. I'm happy to share the information that's been shared with me over the years by many great mentors and players and friends and colleagues. And just looking forward to your success, man. So thanks so much.
Likewise. Yeah, and the saxophone, this has been a glaring omission for us. And I'm so glad, we were just waiting for you, basically. And so it's a great place to start with the saxophone, probably the most important jazz instrument. So the circle's complete now, so thank you.
Piano.
Well, piano, of course.
Piano.
We know
Yeah,
it.
right.
This is actually a piano podcast. Well, we covered that, so yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, no,
Appreciate
this has been really, really fun. That's rain you're hearing.
It
by
is
the way.
raining out.
Yeah,
It's raining right
really
now.
hard.
That's a little bonus for the you'll
Or
hear.
did you turn on a fan? No, but
So normally we talk about, we can give it a quick one. We're kind of we're always looking for ratings and
Here we go.
reviews. Because we don't get paid for this, so they pay us with their ratings and reviews. So we're asking for 5 stars, but we're pushing it. 6 stars?
Man, I think it's 7, man.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Seven is the lucky number.
Stars. That's right.
You heard it out of Steve Wilson's mouth.
That's right. 7 stars. Leave us a rating review. We love you
right.
guys.
Selected 7.
That's right.
Yeah, and you can also go to you'llhearit.com if you want to leave us a question or a comment or give us a lesson suggestion. We're always open to that, as you know.
A lesson suggestion? What'd you call it?
It's been a long day, man. My jaw's tired.
My jaw.
TMJ. You heard it here first.
You'll hear it.
All right. Love it.